A majority of South African lawmakers on Tuesday voted in favor of a motion calling for the closure of the Israeli embassy and the cutting of diplomatic ties until Israel agrees to a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the vote on the motion, supported by ruling African National Congress Party, came as President Cyril Ramaphosa, in a meeting with other world leaders, accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza with its military offensive the besieged territory in search of its Hamas militant rulers. And of course, joining me right now on the program is Aaliyah Vayez, of course, African Affairs Analyst, joining in from the United Kingdom, and Itumeleng Makgetla, Political Analyst, joining from Pretoria, South Africa. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm sure Itumeleng will join us in the course of the conversation. But let me start off with you, Aaliyah. Now, the two countries' diplomatic relations have witnessed a rise in tensions over the war in Gaza. Now, Ramaphosa, the president, previously said his country believes Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza, where thousands of Palestinians have been killed. Now, do you concur with the president's position?
On a personal level, yes, I do. I think the South African government has been exceptionally clear from the day one of not only from the 7th of October, where we saw Hamas's surprise attack on Israel, but I think historically the position of the African National Congress and of the larger South African government, in the majority vote that you mentioned, is largely in line with South African foreign policy as well as its stance towards Palestinian rights, including the right to self-determination and its right to be free of any level of settler colonialism and Israeli occupation. I think it's very, very much in line with what South Africa has been saying for years, that is in full solidarity with Palestinian people and their rights, as mentioned. I think President Cyril Ramaphosa has been exceptionally proactive alongside South Africa's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, in making global and as well as continental calls for solidarity for Palestine, and specifically in the more immediate term for a ceasefire of all hostilities in Gaza, especially, as well as settler violence in the West Bank. I think South Africa's foreign policy is kicking up a notch, as we've seen, as Cyril Ramaphosa has called a meeting of the BRICS leaders, which took place yesterday, I believe. The BRICS of the BRICS leaders, my apologies, about the urgency or the dire humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Palestine. I think South Africa is really taking a kind of more leadership position, at least on the diplomatic level, and now we've seen it not only from its national statements as well as its national moves, as you mentioned, about closing the Israeli embassy, but also on an international level by using those multilateral partnerships that it's got to align with its own foreign policy when it comes to Palestine.
Now, of course, looking at the position of South Africa, particularly in this conflict, being vocal against Israel, and we also know that Israel, isn't standing alone. It's strong allies with the United States and also the UK. What do you think will be the fallout of this in terms of implication for South Africa, particularly when it comes to not just its relationship now with Israel, but also with the United States and, of course, the Western allies?
I think it is. I definitely think there will be, a certain level of fallout when it comes to, at least even at the diplomatic level, when it comes to those who are, for lack of a better phrasing, for or against or pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. I think at a diplomatic level, we've seen, South Africa make that call for a ceasefire, in favor of Palestinian right to self-determination, in favor of international humanitarian law at international fora like the UN. I think I don't foresee any sort of cutting of ties or sanctioning or anything harsh or extensive in that way against South Africa for their diplomatic statements, and they're very kind of tangible shows of support in favor of Palestine. But I think South Africa is making itself known as a diplomatic force on this issue, and I think countries, for example, Western countries like the US, like the UK, I think it's about awareness of what South Africa has said and what their position is, and also knowing that South Africa has very much kept its stance in favor of Western principles, which uphold the international system. So, for example, international and humanitarian law, justice, like the use of the International Criminal Court, the use of the words like democracy and a right to self-determination. So I think thinking of it as a binary question about whether South Africa will be in any way penalized or shunned or negatively impacted by its pro-Palestine stance is to reduce the issue, and is to kind of reduce the agency of various states when acting at the level of showing support for not only Palestine but the principles of the international system and of global governance at large.
All right, Aaliyah, I'll come back to you. Let's go to Itumeleng, who has actually joined in right now. Itumeleng, just quickly, I would like to know what South Africans actually think of the president's position when it comes to what is going on, at the Gaza Strip. South Africa being very vocal against, what Israel is doing, at the Gaza Strip, particularly, in search of Hamas. And also, South Africa seems to have announced last week that it referred to what Israel is doing as genocide in Gaza, and of course has called on the International Criminal Court for an investigation, actually requesting that an arrest warrant be issued against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, will this particular move hold weight?
I think generally in South Africa, this issue is so emotive, and it has been emotive. Let's remember that in 2016, the African National Congress, the ruling party here, resolved at their conference in Johannesburg that the embassy of South Africa should be downgraded to a liaison office in Tel Aviv. Since then, the situation has been tanking, and now with this passing through of this particular bill to sever ties or to suspend the ties with Israel, South Africans are divided because there are existential questions of whether really South Africa also does have moral authority of the issue at hand, bearing in mind that it's also having a mountain of problems domestically. And yes, South Africa is a global player, but this issue is not a one-sided thing, and it will continue for a long time to really be so divisive in the politic of South Africa. In terms of the referral of the president to the ICC, I think South Africa is well within its right, because what is happening in Israel is a total abomination and a big blot on humanity and his ability to sort his differences out. So I think South Africa moralistically there can have a moral ground to say, well, we have experienced such almost the same systems that is being experienced by the Palestinians, and we know the pain, and it is only a right thing to do in our conscience.
But again, you talked about moral grounds. We know that Putin also, before the BRICS summit, actually has, an arrest warrant from the same ICC, and was meant to, come to South Africa. And South Africa actually wasn't vocal, against Putin, even though there have been accusations, and counter accusations concerning what is going on between Ukraine and Russia. Is that not some sort of hypocrisy?
I am glad that you asked that particular question, because there is also an underlying historical relations that South Africa's foreign policy is veering towards supporting. We know that Palestine and the African National Congress have got a long history of solidarity against domination. So one can say the same about the Global South, yes, for sure, but this relations, as well as the relationship with Russia, also emanate from a distant past when the African National Congress was in need of emancipation itself. So on those grounds alone, one can understand why the African National Congress particularly is pushing so hard and getting some support from some opposition's party on this matter. So it's about the geopolitical history that is at play here. It's not just as simple as a question of hypocrisy.
Now, let me go back to you, of course, Aaliyah. Now, earlier this month, South Africa actually recalled its ambassador to Israel and withdrew all of its diplomatic staff. In the same vein, Israel's foreign ministry actually did do same. Now, my question to you is this. What's the implication of this, particularly on not just the political landscape, particularly on the side of South Africa, but also the economic sector too? How much of an impact will this have?
Well, to be fair, I think, it's not to discount any economic and trade ties between South Africa and Israel, but I do look, South Africa has very much said that, it's suspending all diplomatic ties. It's suspending diplomatic relations with Israel until a ceasefire, until a ceasefire is reached, and until a meaningful peace process has been engaged in. That is not to say that South Africa is discounting future economic and trade ties with Israel, nor with Palestine. However, I think, as Itumeleng mentioned, I think South Africa is making an incredibly powerful diplomatic and moral stance to say that we will not engage with countries that are enacting this level of violence against a people. As well as, ruling out various, as I mentioned previously, various principles and values on which, countries like South Africa operate at a national level, such as human rights, accountability by law and by a justified legal system, but also internationally. So I think in the short term, I think, definitely there will be, a degree of negative fallout. Especially, businesses that have direct, imports and exports, with between South Africa and Israel. But I think, in the long term, the economic outlook is unclear, simply because South Africa has not ruled out future economic or trade ties with Israel, and neither has Israel with South Africa. So I think it's kind of a safety, a safe bet on that side. I will say that South African, pro-Palestine or Palestine solidarity groups have been exceptionally clear in their call for, fellow South Africans as well as the South African government to engage in boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel and, from their companies or commercial companies that support Israel in any way, are based in Israel, or fund Israel in any way, to academic institutions such as universities, etc. And I think these calls are, strongly have historically picked up a lot of momentum and are continuing to be made in South Africa. And I think diplomatic tie, the cessation or suspension rather of diplomatic ties has gone a long way in potentially promoting further boycotting, divestment, or sanctioning of institutions, commercial companies, etc., anything linked to Israel. So I think there is definite potential, while the economic impact in the immediate term is not entirely certain or extensive by any means. I think there is potential for it to grow.
All right, now I would, of course, go to Itumeleng. Now, a quick one. We know that latest development right now concerning what is going on at the Gaza Strip has it that a truce, some sort of truce has been reached, particularly on the aspect of hostage release. We know that Hamas is releasing about 50 hostages and Israel is releasing about 150 prisoners. Now, will this in any way rub off in sort of de-escalating the tension between South Africa and Israel?
I think, first of all, we are all, the majority of us are hoping that this release or this exchange of prisoners and hostages will actually take place. And even though it falls far short of really making a big gesture, because the desired outcome is for all of them to be safe with their family and loved ones, to really integrate again into their households and to start rebuilding their lives. This war, I do not think it will be a short-lived one, because the interlocutors are just so ingrained in the hatred that has been simmering over a period of 75 years without any hope and horizon of the solving of it. The United Nations and the world community has been at this for a long time, and I do not think that South Africa will be soon be reconciling with Israel, not at this moment perhaps.
Mm. I would like your response to Aaliyah in 30 seconds.
My response to your question, I think, it's I don't believe, the cessation of hostilities and, encapsulated by the word truce. So whether it's hostages, allowance of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the cessation of the bombardment of the Gaza Strip, and settler violence in the West Bank and other occupied Palestinian territories, is any sign of, this is not a humanitarian favor being offered by either side. I understand that it may allow for some breathing room in the 4 days that it is allowed, but no, I don't think this is going, far enough at all for the Palestinian people. And as I mentioned earlier, I think South Africa is exceptionally committed to seeing a long-term positive peace, the right to self-determination, the right to a democracy, and the right to return for all Palestinians. And I think the truth is, it's the tip of the iceberg towards that. So yes, I think, this isn't going to go a far way in settling, or reconciling South Africa and Israel at all.
Aaliyah Vayez, African Affairs Analyst, of course, joining from the United Kingdom, and Itumeleng Makgetla, political analyst, joining from Pretoria, South Africa. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.